Love variegation in your plants, but not the effort it sometimes takes to maintain it? Today's Meet the Plant episode is just for you. Welcome to my channel. I'm Cece with OneGreepea. Today I'm going to introduce you to one of my newest obsessions, the Scindapsus. I'm going to talk through the care and maintenance of the Scindapsus. I will talk about how to propagate the plant. At the end, I'll walk you through a tour of the 4 Scindapsus species in my collection. The Scindapsus plants are generally climbing or trailing vines. They are characterized by absolutely gorgeous silver variegation that varies from species to species, and the leaves can range from small to large. The Scindapsus is commonly referred to as the Satin Pothos, and that becomes rather confusing because we usually associate the common name pothos with the genus Epipremnum, and that is the much more common pothos that we see all over. Now, these two plants are similar, the Scindapsus and the Epipremnum, but they're not the same. There are some very important distinctions. I'll point those out as we move through the video today. But this is just another example of why we need to get more comfortable with actually using the Latin botanical names for our plants so we know which plant we're talking about. So let's start with the botanical nomenclature. The Scindapsus belongs to the family Araceae, or aroid. The genus then is Scindapsus, and as far as species under the genus, there are over 35 recognized species of the Scindapsus. Like I mentioned before, you will see these referred to often as the silver pothos or silver satin pothos, or just remember, they're not the common pothos. The Scindapsus are native to tropical cultures, to Southeast Asia and some other Western Pacific islands. Now, that's important to understand just because it gives us a guide as to the conditions that the Scindapsus prefers. Let's jump into the care needs of the Scindapsus. As far as care on my scale of 1 to 5 of easy to challenging, I would put the Scindapsus at about a 2, 2.5. They're really relatively easy. Starting with light, the Scindapsus prefers bright, indirect light, as most of your aroids do. They do prefer more light than your standard Epipremnum or pothos. Too much direct light will burn the leaves, but if this plant is not getting adequate amounts of indirect light, then it will lose some of this variegation that it's known for. The Scindapsus prefers to dry out moderately between waterings, so you want to be sure that when you put your finger into the soil to check for moisture, at least 1 to 2 knuckles down in the soil is dry before you water. They don't want to have soggy roots. That leads directly to the type of soil mixture that they prefer. They like a chunky, airy, well-draining soil mix. So any of your standard aroid mixes are going to work just fine. I will put my mixture recipe down in the comments below. I fertilize my Scindapsus just as I do the rest of my plants every time I water with a very, very diluted form of plant food. Again, I will put that down in the comments below. I find that to be the easiest so that I don't have to try to remember when I last fertilized, just so it's always getting a steady supply of nutrients. As far as temperature and humidity, they're okay with normal household temperatures. And the more humidity, the better, but I have found in my dry home, 35 to 40% is just fine for them. Let's talk about propagation. Since they are a vining plant, they are relatively easy to propagate. You would simply take a stem cutting from the plant, making sure that you have 1 to 2 nodes, and then just place that in water. I have done that with this plant, and as you can see, there are teeny tiny roots already starting to form along those nodes. My intention with this particular plant is to fill it in. It's a little more bare in the center than I would prefer it. What I've already done with this plant is take cuttings, root them in water, and then plant them right back into the center of the plant. So these little stems that are poking straight up that are shorter than the rest are propagates that I have taken. They're already starting to create leaves, and so they're going to very quickly come to the length of the other plants. I'll keep trimming these back so eventually I have a nice full bushy plant. You will notice that the Scindapsus often will send out a stem that appears to not have any leaves on it. There are a variety of theories about why that happens. It could be that the plant is not getting quite enough light, but I just think it's something that this plant does. Now this stem is rather bare until here at the end some leaves are forming. This would be a perfect stem to take a cutting from. I would cut it just below probably this node so I could have 2 nodes in the water. And then when I planted this, I would have a nice length of stem with leaves coming off of it, and then again plant it right in the center. Now, if you don't want to backfill your plant, you could also take those cuttings and create a completely new plant for yourself or to gift to someone else. Moving on, let's do a tour of the Scindapsus in my collection. The very first Scindapsus I brought into my collection was this one. This is the Scindapsus pictus argyraeus. Pictus means painted, referring to the beautiful silver variegation on the leaves. This is, I would say, the most common Scindapsus variety. It is found readily at plant shops and big box stores and online. This one's really easy to find, and I found it to be a rather vigorous grower. The leaves tend to be on the small side and don't have quite as much variegation as some of the others I will show you today, but the variegation is absolutely beautiful. The leaf margins are also silver. This is a wonderful plant to start with. It's very forgiving and very easy to take care of. I have taken so many cuttings from this plant and, like I mentioned before, started to repot into the center so I can continue filling out this plant. This plant is the most recent addition to my collection. This is the Scindapsus pictus siamese. I had never seen this plant before, and in trying to research it, there's not a lot of information out about it, so I think it's relatively rare. This one, as you can see, has much more abundant variegation of that silver variegation on the leaves. And something interesting to note is that the leaves are not symmetrical. Each one has a central vein, but there's a different amount of leaf on each side of that vein, which I think is kind of fun and quirky. What I have read about this is that it does tend to be a slower grower, so I'm glad that I found a plant that is as full as this one. Now, I can tell by lifting it that I have let this one get too dry, so as soon as I'm done taping, I'm going to go soak this in the sink. My third Scindapsus pictus is the Scindapsus pictus exotica. And this one has enormous leaves and really thick stems. The leaves are even thicker than the other varieties I've shown you so far. This plant demonstrates again, abundant amount of variegation, but it's also so different on each leaf. This leaf is mostly silver with just a little bit of the green, and then some of these others have a lot more green. So each leaf is completely different. I would say a slower grower than the first one I showed you, but it's coming along and it's producing a couple of nice long vines, and it's just a treasure in my mind. The exotica are fairly commonly found in plant shops now. The final Scindapsus in my collection is this beauty. This is the Scindapsus trubii, or moonlight. So rather than the pictus or painted variegation of the other plants I've shown you, this one is characterized by a silvery sheen over the entire leaf. I think that it is rather stunning. Now you can see that central vein, but it's just this milky, silvery satin look to the whole leaf. Now to maintain that beautiful look, this plant needs a little bit more light than some of the others. So be sure to prioritize an east-facing window, for instance, for this plant. Thank you for watching my video on the gorgeous genus, the Scindapsus. I hope it was enlightening to you and perhaps motivated you to go and find a Scindapsus for your collection. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of my planting content. As always, my plant friends, let's keep growing together a greener world.